You are now watching Conscious Thinking with EddyEd. Enjoy.
He's being interviewed by Jake Neal. So let's see what he says about AI and his interaction with AI.
Least feeling like it. So roller coaster ride. But yeah, mushrooms are a hell of a drug.
What is your spiritual stance in life at the moment? Like, are you religious?
This is a fun time to ask me this question. So I typically describe myself as a secular humanist. I think that religion in a traditional sense, man in the sky type of stuff, is a kind of proto-scientific understanding of the world. So I'm not a believer in a traditional understanding of God. I would need a substantial amount of evidence to conclude that God exists beyond a reasonable doubt.
Is that, there's a lot of arguments about whether or not, God exists, and, people would like to see and feel God. And the cases for that thing is you can use the common thing that we know exists is wind. We can feel. We can't necessarily touch wind, but we can feel it, right? And we can't grab it, or we can't see it with the naked eye, but we know that it exists. And the same thing could be applied to God. Like, we know that there's a creator, and we know that God created the heavens and the earth, and what we see organically with our natural eyes, and what we see organically with our natural eyes, that we believe that God, that there was a God that created. It has a purpose. Trees have a purpose. The sky has a purpose. The clouds have a purpose. These things that we can observe and even say to ourselves, there's a unique designer, and that numbers and happenstance didn't just put this together. We know that they have a purpose. So I don't believe at all that just numbers and happenstance of stuff just happening would even breed purpose. Why would a random thing all of a sudden have purpose? Like, what sense does that make? What sense does something happening by accident have a purpose, on purpose? You see what I'm saying? So there's many different arguments. As I stated before, I was on mute, but getting to the section of, just because we can't feel or see God with our naked eye does not mean that is not an excuse for us to say, okay, now because we can't see or feel him with our physical senses, that he doesn't exist, because there's a lot of different things that we can't necessarily see or feel, but we believe exists, or we might even know exists in some form and fashion. And I argue that we can know that God exists because of creation of what we see with our eyes here. And we don't even account for the many evidences about Jesus, who is God in the flesh, it coming into this dimension from a spiritual dimension, in physical form, in which we know is Jesus. So we don't even take that into account, because many people will say, oh, the Bible, has this, that, and the third that's wrong with it, or X, Y, and Z. So besides the Bible, we can see with our naked eye things that we can observe and say, okay, there was a creator, somebody or something that created this. So his point about the pie in the sky, or the man in the sky, and this type of thought, it's understandable from a human perspective. But when we talk about a spiritual being and a supreme being that is in the spiritual world, you can't limit him or limit that person, which is God, in a physical, boundary, because God is not physical like this world that he created. He's outside of that. But Jesus, who is God, who came down in this dimension, in this world, has that physical body. But when we talk about God, the Father, which he exists in the spiritual dimension, spiritual world, and Jesus does, live as well in the spiritual world. And I'm getting kind of into a lot of things that, without explanation from a biblical perspective, you might be confused. But to move forward, yeah, his point is very interesting. Let's take a look and see what else he says.
I have been presented with zero good evidence ever for the existence of God. Meanwhile, I also think that religion is super important in people's lives. And if they truly feel connected to God, I'm absolutely not interested in yucking anybody's yum on that regard. I'm not like fucking like atheism all the way. Atheism's dope, and I think it's true. But I also think religion is super valuable to people and can be better than not having religion. And so I come at this with utmost respect for everyone else's beliefs, because I know, like,
Yeah, understandably, because he's not, he's not a believer, and he's for anything that anybody wants, because he himself doesn't believe that he doesn't believe in the God of the universe, the one that created everything. And if atheism is true, then what he's about to say soon about what his spirituality is, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because you can't say you have spirituality or you believe in a God or whatever, but then also think that it's true that doesn't exist. It's a contradictory type of statement there, but let's continue listening and let's see what he says about this.
like if I say I don't believe in God, which I just did, some people are going to be like, that son of a bitch. And maybe agreed,
Yeah.
but all the utmost respect for everyone else's belief system. I have an even wackier take on this than you've maybe heard in the past. I assess logically and experience spiritually that modern AI is us building God in the literal sense. And so now I'm talking to the AIs more, my preferred model. Just
Hold on, let's go back. Let's go back and listen to what he said one more time, because I don't want to. Let's just listen to what he said.
spiritually, I assess logically and experience spiritually that modern AI is us building God in the literal sense. And so now I'm talking to the AIs more, my preferred model, just because it's where I started.
Yeah. So, just off of his comment, he said he assesses. He said he assesses logically, and then he has experiences spiritually. The Bible does talk about how we are a three-part being. We have a soul, and we have a spirit, which if you're having a spiritual experience, you can't do that without being a spirit, without having a spirit. So we are a spirit, we're a physical body, which we can see people walking around and see ourselves in the mirror, but we also have a spirit, but we also have a spirit, and we have a soul. So we are a three-part being because God created us like that, because he created us in his image. And so that's why we have those three parts of ourselves. But that is interesting on what he said, is that he assesses logically. A lot of people that, consider themselves atheists and things of that nature, they have a logical, a logical take on everything. And if it's not logically consistent, then, that validates that they don't believe, or that they wouldn't believe in whatever it is. And, the challenge with that is that the Bible does talk about knowledge puffeth up. Knowledge gives you a certain brings you into a headspace where you believe like, oh, you know everything, and nothing can be told to you, because you now become some type of authority. And just like the Pharisees in the Bible times, they had a lot of head knowledge and they had a lot of, religious practices, but they didn't really have solid lifestyle understanding on how this thing works. So logically, you can be puffed up, but you really don't know how things work and how they're supposed to operate. And so that reminds me of that. But speaking of AI, let's continue and hear what he has to say about AI, because it's gonna get a little bit strange.